Rabbi Melanie Levav is the head of the Shomer Collective, which is co-sponsoring yesterday and today's session. Great to have you, Melanie. Thanks for saying a few words about your work, your holy work with the Shomer Collective.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Marc, for inviting Shomer Collective to join you here at IJS today and yesterday as we continue to prepare for our annual dress rehearsal for death on Yom Kippur starting Sunday night. Our work at Shomer Collective emerged from the realization that too many of us wind up in crisis around end of life because we haven't talked about or prepared for the inevitable, and that Jewish wisdom has so much to offer us on the topic of death and dying. The mission for our work is to improve end-of-life experiences for individuals, for families, inspired by Jewish wisdom, values, and practices. And we do that by curating content and resources and by building a diverse network of organizational partners like IJS. We envision a world where end-of-life matters are spoken about openly, thoughtfully, frequently, creating opportunities for many more people to engage with the richness of Jewish tradition around death and dying. I'll put a link to our work in the chat and invite folks to sign up for our newsletter. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to engage today and yesterday in a mindfulness practice focused on mortality here together in sacred community. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Melanie. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to some conversation with you as soon as we end at the top of the hour. But let's just turn to our practice today, just noting where we are in the week. Friday, we're in the midst, actually towards the end now of these 10 days of turning the Aser Yemei Tshuva, and just a couple of days away, not much more than 48 hours away from Yom Kippur. So let's take a moment just to settle into Shabbat together, just a few minutes right now. And move into practice. You can do that by closing our eyes. If you haven't already, just letting go of whatever is on your mind, whatever is occupying you right now, whatever your plans are for the rest of today, just set that down for a bit and let's try to be here now and cultivate a state of hineni, of being as present as we can be. Do that by anchoring our attention in the breath or in the body or in sound. Whatever helps you, just turn to what is true right now. And to do that with curiosity, compassion, and love. That's the whole recipe. This whole practice is summed up in the two Hebrew words, chesed ve'emet. Chesed, loving kindness, compassion. Emet, truth. We're just sitting for a couple of minutes, letting our bodies settle down in their seat, setting down the weight of whatever we've been carrying this week. Give us a chance to breathe. Putting down any grudges, resentments, irritations. You can still feel those things, but we can choose to loosen our grip on them. And the same with joys and celebrations, can also loosen our grip there as well. Just let them be. Sitting, as the poet Rumi suggests, as a human guest house, as if with an open door, welcoming in whatever thoughts, feelings, sensations, sounds arrive. letting them check in and check out at their own pace. So this pre-Yom Kippur meditation, you can just stay with your practice as I share a few words in relation to our practice in Yom Kippur, which, as Rabbi Melanie said, is a dress rehearsal for our own death. Sounds dire. A lot of the practices, traditional practices associated with Yom Kippur relate to death. We're meant to dress in white, not just as a symbol of purity, but also representing the shrouds wrapping our bodies after we pass from this world, after we die. The fasting, abstaining from the pleasures of this world, boiling things down to their essence. And liturgically, so many things which remind us of impermanence and of human mortality, such as the recitation of the Yizkor prayers for our loved ones we've lost, who have died. Ela Eskara, martyrology, recalling the martyrs of our people. And even ending the day with the Shema, which of course is also intended to be recited each night on our beds, since we do not know if we'll wake up in the morning, and also traditionally to be recited on our own deathbed. None of this is meant to depress us. In fact, just the opposite. It's meant to wake us up. It's meant to invite us to move towards joy in living and meaning in living. And it's an invitation, more of an invitation to joy than to sadness. As we said, I'll share some words from Rabbi Milton Steinberg, who's probably best known as the author of the novel about Elisha ben Abuya. As a driven leaf, who died at a very young age, I believe at age 46 himself. He's rabbi of the very prestigious Park Avenue Synagogue in Manhattan, who had his own near-death experience as well, a near-fatal heart attack. And in his recuperation, took a walk in the sun and had this awareness of how precious life is and how we just walk through our days asleep, unaware of the preciousness and the beauty, the wonder of life. His brush with his own mortality woke him up to that wonder, to that preciousness. He spoke about this experience in his most famous sermon, To Hold with Open Arms. He said what he learned from that experience, from his brush with mortality, his dress rehearsal for what turned out to be a premature death, is that we are meant to hold the world, to hold life, hold it tight, to embrace life and live it fully, but with relaxed hands, to embrace life with open arms. And he wrote this: it's easier to let these things go, the things and people who are so precious to us. It's easier to imagine our inevitable passing from this world because we know that as parts of the divine economy, they will not be lost. The sunset, the bird song, the baby smile, the thunder of music, surge of great poetry, the dreams of the heart, and our own being, precious to each of us. All these we can well trust to God who made them. There's poignancy and regret about giving them up, but not anxiety. When they slip from our hands, they will pass to hands better, stronger, and wiser than ours. My dear friend, teacher to many of those of you who are often here for this meditation, Mickey Young, who also died prematurely, but spoke at a time when she was aware of that mortality, who wrote that for her there was a comfort to mortality. She wrote, I think someday when the timing is right, I will simply fall back into a large white parachute, letting go of worry, letting go of fear, just relaxing into the silkiness. Until that time, I find it comforting to think that the reason for my mortality is to drive my living. We are all here for such a short time that it's important to discern what we really want our lives to be about. A wonderful Buddhist metaphor that we are each like the sea turtle swimming underwater for a long period, rising to the surface to take in a big gulp of air and then submerging again. That gulp of air is our lifetime. It's only here that we get to do our work and our good deeds. So let's sit with that heightened awareness that we learn from two great teachers who, in their brush with mortality and with awareness of mortality and their willingness to turn towards what is true, to turn towards what is real, what is true, which is that our time is limited. To allow that awareness to wake us up, maybe even to change us a little bit, be a little more grateful, a little more generous, a little bit more kind, a little bit more forgiving of ourselves and others. This is the practice of Yom Kippur. So inviting you to sit and imagine, as Mickey Young shared, imagine yourself as that sea turtle swimming for all eternity under the water, but coming up, breaking the surface in this lifetime and breathing. And as Ken or Lizzie invited us yesterday to notice the exhalation, without any expectation or knowing whether there'll be another breath, but just to imagine each exhalation as a rehearsal for our final one. Hold it for a second or two before receiving the next in breath. Wake up to the wonder and the preciousness that there is in another breath. And to be grateful fully for each one. To live as fully as possible. To be alive as much as possible. Let's sit for the next 8 minutes or so with that awareness. If this awareness of mortality feels especially challenging for you, you can just offer yourself some compassion. Place your hand on your heart or both hands on your heart. Offering another image for our practice of the wave emerging from the ocean and then settling back into the ocean, never leaving the ocean, always being water. Just imagine ourselves as ocean and as individual waves, temporarily rising up out of that vastness and then subsiding back into it. Like you can visualize that with your breath, inhaling as the wave arises and exhaling as the wave subsides and recedes back into its source, just as we do. And maybe imagining the scene of the ocean with innumerable waves representing this group sitting together right now. Individual lives arising, falling away, all at their own time, their own schedule. And all of us part of that same ocean of aliveness. The last few minutes of our sit, really allowing ourselves to softening the muscles in the face, especially the jaw muscles that hold any tension, resistance. Paying a lot of kind attention to the neck and the shoulders, the hands, allowing the breathing to be a little bit deeper, expanding the belly. The mantra of Yom Kippur is one that reminds us of the essentially loving nature of the universe, of God. It's a chant of the 13 attributes of mercy, forgiveness, and patience, and loving kindness, and compassion. That is chanted throughout the day over and over and over as a kind of balm. Combination of chesed and emet, of truth, day of really facing the truth, that is cushioned because it takes place in the context of a day of pure, unadulterated chesed and loving kindness. So end the sit with a few more words from my friend and teacher, Mickey Young. To me, the only reason for our death and the deaths of those we love is to give urgency to how we choose to live. It offers us, in fact, the ultimate deadline. Forced to face the thought of the ending of my life has raised questions about my existence, about my destiny. What am I meant to do in this life? How can I help others? I struggle to try and determine what's the best path, and then I stop. This is not about struggling. This is about listening deeply and having the courage and self-compassion to take the very next step. We have all come into the world to sing our tune, to learn life's lessons, to share with others where we can do the most good. Living reveals who we are with all the blessings of our human strengths and our human frailties. We learn from both. And if we don't learn from our own experiences, maybe at least others will. So if your eyes have been closed, you can slowly allow them to open, flutter open, and if your attention has been inward, you can turn it outward towards the group. And with this awareness of mortality, we are conscious of those among us who are in mourning, who have suffered loss, who are grieving. And we invite them to recite the Mourner's Kaddish at this time, put the name or names of those they're honoring in the chat box. And those of us who are not reciting Kaddish, please stay present if you can. For those who are, offer your support. And if you're reciting the Kaddish, I invite you to join me by rising in body or in spirit. And you can unmute at this time. Yitgadal, Kadash, Shemei Rabba, Yamad, Yirah, Yich Malchutei, Aye Chon, Yameach, Aye Deval Be'ez, Agalach, Kariv,
Amen.
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivarach, Olamei
Olamei
Olam,
Olam.
Rach,
Ishtabach, Shemam, Tadai, Shmid Kushal,
Elam, Elam, Katav Shirat, Katav Nechamat, Amiran Ba'ala, Shema Rabba Mishmayav, Shalom B'Olam, Shalom, Shalom, Israel, Yalkol Yoshvei Tevel, Amen.
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 Friends, thanks so much for joining us today, and I want to take the moment to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Shuvah. It's a special Shabbat, the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. May it be a deep and meaningful one for you. And for Sunday night and Monday, of course, we will not be meeting live on Monday in observance of Yom Kippur, but wishing each of you a Gamar Chatima Tova, a meaningful day. For those of you whose practice it is to fast, maybe a Tzom Kal, an easy fast, but more importantly, or just as importantly, a meaningful fast. And we hope we'll see everybody back here on Tuesday. We'll be meeting next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not on Friday, in preparation for Sukkot. IGS will be closed. So next week we'll be meeting live Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And everyone's invited to stay on. Invite Rabbi Melanie Levav of the Shomer Collective to join me and for some conversation. If you have questions about the sit today, about the teaching, or about any of these practices or why we're doing this in proximity to Yom Kippur, please put them in the chat. If it's a question, here's something special I want to share from David Hannig before we begin, Melanie. With David Hannig is a regular participant here, beautiful poet. And David put this poem, I assume this is yours, David, The Ocean. You know the ocean? Can you see the storm raging on the surface? The violent winds that tumble waves and contort the foaming crests? Do you hear the wreckage and debris of your life collide as you struggle to remain afloat? And yet, beneath the surface, do you sense the stillness? Down below, there are no thrusting billows and no clashing debris. Down below, there's only the soft surge of an entire ocean cradle, like a gentle breath caressing your body. Go now, abandon your surface, learn to dwell below, where the source of you and all things abides. Thank you so much, David. Well, Melody, just want to see, let's start by saying if anything that you would like to add to anything I shared today, or if you have any response to it, or start with that. And then we'll
Sure,
talk a little bit
thanks.
about, want to make sure you have some time to talk about the work that you're doing.
Sure. I appreciate you starting with Milton Steinberg. And as I was listening to you read his words and then looking at them on the source sheet on my screen, and this part in particular, the sunset, the bird's song, the baby's smile, the thunder of music, the surge of great poetry, precious to each of us, all these we can well trust to God who made them. It reminded me of the song, the poem by Chana Senesh, Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand, the sea, the crush of the waters, and the prayer of human. And I was thinking about that when you gave us the instruction to spend an extra moment on the exhale before we allow ourselves the gift of the inhale. And it felt to me like the work is letting go of the anxiety that the exhale is the last exhale. Looking forward to, with great anticipation, the gift of the inhale, but recognizing that it's not always guaranteed. And so we pray, and Milton Steinberg acknowledges these beautiful things of nature, the bird's song, the sunset, the baby's smile, and putting that in God's hands. It comforts me that those things will continue after my lifetime. When I am able to accept God's role in the world and presence beyond my mortality.
Yeah. So I raised a question. There's a question here from Lenny, which I'm sure others share also. And maybe all of us share the same question, even in large or small part. And Lenny wrote, I get fearful when I think about my death. Any advice? I wanted to account for that actually in the meditation. I invited people to offer some comfort, because it's, in a sense, we're kind of grieving our own death, right, in advance. So what do you think about that? I mean, someone who deals all the time with this question about end of life, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I'm not a hit at cocktail parties when people ask what I do, and I tell them, and I have to respond to people's assumption that this is so weighty in a way that, you can't even wake up the next morning to face it again, the work of helping people to confront their mortality. My response is that I find it to be life-giving, that our ability to confront the fear that we might not wake up tomorrow allows me to live more fully into the life that I have today. How am I going to make the best of the hours that I have ahead of me? Right. Looking forward to the plans I've made for tomorrow, which include plenty of rest on Shabbat. But just in case I don't get there, I have today. I have this moment. For me, that's enough to move past the fear. I think a lot of the work that we promote at Shomer Collective is being in conversation with those important to us about the reality that we're not going to live forever, so that we get the work of living to a place where we're okay with it, where we're okay with our people, with how we've chosen to spend our time as much as we can be. Nothing's going to be perfect in this life. So that if we don't get to see tomorrow, we exit this life feeling okay about where we've been.
Yeah. I mean, there's many aspects to that fear. I think one thing, that I think you're saying also is that one of the, that we spend a lot of time avoiding the subject or thinking about this because of that fear, but actually it's still sitting there. It's always there. It's just under the surface. And that naming the fear, just and honoring that fear, is part of the process of moving through it and extracting from it the kind of wisdom that you're talking about living. Really, that's, I think, what I mean, we've been using Alan Liu's book, This Is Real, which is about what's the real. The real is we're going to die. This is real, and we are completely unprepared. You are completely unprepared. We are completely unprepared. His premise is that this whole, this is a whole period of the year of consciousness of this, starting back in Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, back, earlier in the summer, of acclimating ourselves to this over time so that we can really fully turn to it on Yom Kippur, having moved through a whole stage of grief about it, so that we can actually look at it without fear, without as much anxiety, right? So here's a question also, though, another question, because Milton Steinberg cites God, you were citing God, my friend Mickey in her piece is describing God, but I think for people for whom it's a struggle, whether it's a question of belief, for people who think that, this world is all there is and that it's all over, when the end comes, how do we account for that? How do people account for that? Say.
I think that's why the rabbis came up with ideas about the afterlife, right? We don't know if there is. And so in some way, I see those as an attempt to comfort those of us who get stuck in the fear loop, that, we might be reunited with the people who we missed terribly, who we wish only to be able to see one more time. That to me is accessible, regardless of belief in God.
A lot of people don't. It's interesting. A lot of people have no idea that that's, of course, that there's a whole stream of tradition supporting this idea of an afterlife, and that, in fact, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Simcha Paul Raphael, who has like the definitive book about Jewish views of the afterlife, who gives beautiful workshops and really describes all our mourning traditions, really, although we think about them as being for the mourner, are very much originated as practices for the benefit of the souls of those who have died, including Kaddish, and Shiva, Yizkor, etc. So, yeah, and we try here, of course, to also offer like many different ways of understanding God or the divine, including this ocean metaphor, which hopefully is helpful for people, to imagine ourselves arising out of this, as Alan Liu describes it, this great no thing, great no, something beyond the material world that animates us and that we're created from and just come back to. So maybe say a few words about, the actual work of the Shomer Collective for people who don't know like what you're doing. I think it's very important for them to be aware.
Sure. Thanks. We are in the business of supporting individuals and families and professionals and organizations in normalizing conversations about death and dying at every age and stage in Jewish communities, recognizing that when we don't talk about it, when we push death out of our view, we're more likely to end up in a place where it feels like a crisis. It's not to say that any of us who have done all of the work, we have our advanced care plans, we've spoken about our wishes, aren't going to feel the overwhelming shock when someone close to us dies. That's reality of life. But when we talk about it, we have a better chance of reducing the fear and being in a place where we know what's expected of us, when we know what our loved one wants. When mom winds up in the hospital unable to communicate her wishes, that she's already told us what she wants, that we're able to help make decisions as her healthcare proxy according to the values by which she has lived her life. It's a very Jewish idea to communicate your values, that they should live on beyond your lifetime. We see this in Torah with Jacob gathering his children around him on his deathbed, and it's translated into the practice of an ethical will today. This goes beyond just the material will of who's going to get the house, the apartment, right, the retirement funds, if those are part of how you live your life, but more so, how have I lived my life in a way of service to others, in a way of supporting causes, in a way of bringing family together, of spending time with friends in person? How do those values continue to live beyond my lifetime? So Shomer's work is really to bring Jewish wisdom like this into the conversation. Yes, to get the work done of taking care of your advanced care planning and having the conversations, but to bring that Jewish wisdom back into our conversations. You know, over the past 100 years, people in this country have lost touch with the realities that we once might have had around death and dying. I would imagine my great-grandparents in the Shtetlach of Eastern Europe, you know, they were dying in community, in the home. The children were around in ways that today we're dying at a remove physically from our families of origin. We don't live in the same places as they do. And it's been easy because people are dying in hospitals and long-term care facilities to push death out of our view, literally, to the point where when we have to confront it, we're not prepared for it because we've never been through the experience before. So when we've gone through an experience of death of someone close to us and we're willing to talk about it, to normalize that conversation, it helps other people to move into places of more confidence and to access the support that Jewish wisdom, Jewish community has to offer. You know, to wait until someone has died to answer the question of if we're going to sit Shiva puts those questions at the height of our grief. And if we've answered that question before that time, we can be a little bit more prepared to take advantage of what Jewish ritual and Jewish wisdom has to offer us in the form of support. The last thing I'll say on this is, you know, the rabbis in the Talmud imagine their teachers coming back to them in dreams because the rabbis were afraid that death was going to hurt. We have these stories of them talking about what it feels like to die. And that, to me, gives us permission to acknowledge the fear that we have. We're afraid it's going to hurt physically, emotionally. And we have a rich tradition that says to us, confront those fears, talk about it, imagine what it might be like, so that you can head into it in a place of less fear.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about here, and I see also in the chat a lot of questions, really, both about despair and fear about death, about despair and fear about like not having identified one's sense of purpose, or as Mickey Young said, the tune that we're meant to sing. I want to just acknowledge that, but you're doing such holy and courageous work, Melanie, and with the Shaman Collective, and raising this up, and we're really privileged, blessed to have that opportunity to collaborate with this. And thank you for the work. Thanks for the partnership. Let's just end by once again thanking everyone, thanking Jordan Pollock for holding our space today. Thanks to our sponsor for today. I was deeply touched by that. Really appreciate that very much. And again, wish everyone a sweet and restorative Shabbat and a really meaningful Yom Kippur, and looking forward to continuing to move into the new year 5784 together with everyone.